This is a bit of a different video. I'm headed out to the BarZ Industrial. This is the week before the BarZ Bash, Stan Zinkowski's house, and I've been trying to make a point of getting out there and helping him if he needs it before the Bash. This is the week before the Bash. There's so much to do for one of these undertakings. Even with lots of people, he has got just endless amounts of work. So I am just trying to take a little bit of a load off because it's one of my favorite event of the year. I really like meeting all the people in this community. It's a wonderful community. So we're going to head out and get on down to Rancho Cucamonga. It's about 60 miles away, 64 exactly. So we're going to head out and I'll bring you along with me. I stay on streets for only a very short time on this trip. Fortunately or unfortunately, I live close to a freeway. However, you would think that would make it fast, but Southern California, always traffic. Some of the worst in the nation, and it's only been getting worse throughout my life. I've lived here all my life, and when I was a kid, a big traffic jam would be a delay, a slight delay. Now, you're almost always going under the speed limit. Fortunately, this is early in the morning on a Saturday, so I'm hoping that at least getting out there, I should be able to hold the speed limit the whole way, or a little bit over if possible. But coming home, there's no chance of that. It'll be at least an extra half hour coming home. And the weather has been really strange. There was a hurricane down by Mexico that petered out, so it pumped all its moisture up here, which is very unusual. High temperatures, not unusual at all for Southern California. I mean, I've had it over 110 many times in my life, but the humidity that's going on right now is crazy. Yesterday, it was about 100, around 100, 40% humidity. It normally would be 6 to 8%, that kind of temperature in Southern California. That makes it really miserable. It's a whole different thing. Starting to feel a little bit like I'm down Adams Way in Florida. Out by me here in Simi, lots of sandstone. And this is the freeway going through the Santa Susana Pass, heading into the San Fernando Valley, also known as the Valley. And over to my left is the Rocketdyne test site, where at the time the space shuttle engines were tested, among other things. But a bit earlier on in the 50s, several nuclear reactors melted down. There were test nuclear reactors because this was considered way out in the middle of nowhere. And it's now one of the most polluted Superfund sites in the United States. And I don't live that far away, which is really unfortunate. They're supposedly cleaning it up, but after Boeing bought Rocketdyne, they've been sitting in meetings for 5 years over how they're going to do it, because they didn't want to pay, of course. So it can be quite pretty out here. You don't usually think of Southern California as being overly beautiful because we don't get a lot of greenery except in winter. There's still a little bit left that hasn't been killed off by the summer heat yet, but that won't last too much longer, I suspect. And the side of the freeway here always catches on fire. Someone throws a cigarette out every year and catches both sides on fire, where they got the cutout through the mountain here, or the hillside. And it always kills my drive home. There is the San Fernando Valley from the northwest side, looking southeast. And again, it's pretty weird. We do get some ocean fog because we're very close to the beach. The opposite side of the valley, just over those hills, is the ocean. So we always get some of that ocean fog, but it usually burns off. I'd say the San Fernando Valley is famous. It's only famous really, it's mentioned in movies a lot, and there's been a lot of movies shot here. Unfortunately, some of them not so illustrious. The Chatsworth area is famous for it. The other kind of movies for the older folks rather than kids. One site that's particularly famous in the San Fernando Valley is the Sherman Galleria, which is no more, and it was featured in a lot of 80s movies as the Galleria, where the Valley Girls hung out. And that is not really a mall anymore. It got sold because malls are dying everywhere, and so it got sold to a company that puts in large businesses in there, so it's mostly office space, which is sort of strange considering I grew up before it was a mall, before there was even a mall there, and saw the whole evolution of it. It's interesting how things change. When I was a kid, there was no freeway here. This is the 118 freeway, and this huge cutout in the flatlands here was made, and I remember them digging it as I was a kid. All these bridges going over, you used to be able to just I used to ride my bike across some of these streets that used to go right over where the freeway is now. And then for a good portion of my life, the amount of traffic you see now is what the freeway was like. You hit this at traffic now, you're stop and go the entire way. It's absolutely insane how much they've built this out since I was a kid, which, you know, I'm only 50-something years old, so that isn't really that long. Which brings me to another question. I wonder where all this dirt went. I wonder if it became fill for housing projects or something, because, as you can imagine, this is an awful lot of dirt. We're down below the streets in some of these areas 20, 30 feet, and they just dug it all out and took it somewhere. This bridge right here was a street that I used to ride my bicycle to my grammar school in when I was in 6th grade. Grammar school was about 2.5 miles away. That was the era before helicopter parents, and my mom would let me ride my bike to school and back by myself. 2.5 miles each way, and I was in 6th grade when I got to do that. Now someone would call the police or child services and say the parents are abusing their kids. What a different era. I'm pretty sure that people weren't any nicer back then as a whole society. I'm sure there were still plenty of child predators out there, possibly even more because they weren't as easy to track. So I think it's just a whole different world, and I had a pretty good childhood. When I was really young, I had friends that lived down the block from me, and I'd get home from school, get on my bike, and my mom would say, be home at such and such for dinner, and I would just ride up the street and I'd be gone until dinner, and then I'd come home. And that was what my life was, provided I had my homework done, of course, because there's no going out if your homework's not done. This is the connection to the 405 right here. 405 is a north-south freeway that goes essentially the entire state. Well, it becomes part of the 5. It's a connector to the 5, but it goes all the way to San Diego, which is that direction, and north to San Francisco, which is that direction, 360, 70 miles. Right now we're heading east, which is sort of towards Palm Springs, which is, I guess, famous for Southern California, for wealthy people living in 120-degree heat, where they still have golf courses and everything's green. It's kind of crazy. My favorite area out by Palm Springs is not Palm Springs, it's Joshua Tree National Monument. A lot of rock climbing there, and I did a lot of rock climbing when I was younger, before I added the extra girth. We're now heading out through one of the newer freeways, the 118 East, and we're heading out to La Cañada. When I was a kid, my aunt lived out here in La Cañada, and you had to take a street to connect with the freeway out there, or you had to go through Pasadena, which is one of the older parts, and Glendale. And those are some of the older cities in Southern California. The mountains off to the left, which these are just hills in front of us, but there's mountains behind there, get snow on them pretty much every year. Up at the top of one of them is Mount Wilson. Well, specifically Mount Wilson is the Mount Wilson Observatory, which for a long time, now I'm guessing, I think it was the 50s, 60s, it was one of the bigger observatories around. Lots of hiking in Southern California. We don't have that much open space, so you can see all the hikers there, and they're all fairly close. Well, fairly close in this environment, but there's a lot of them, and being by yourself is not something that would be easy to do in Southern California unless you want to head out much, much farther off the beaten path. And these mountains over here to the left, where Mount Wilson is also the Angeles National Forest. And that goes on for quite a ways. And if you wanted to hike back there, you probably could be by yourself without too much trouble. There's Mount Wilson right up there. Actually, I'm wrong. Mount Wilson is over there. Those are other antennas. That is one of the lower peaks. Mount Wilson's over there. Sorry about that. You can sort of see silhouettes, hopefully off in the distance, of the antennas. Those are probably relay towers. There's also, in my business, for the local news, as they're flying around LA, they have to put microwave link towers up on all the big mountains around town, so that they have a way to relay their signal back to the main studios, like KCBS, KCAL, and in order to do that, they need a straight line. Microwaves do not go around corners very well, so you need a straight line of sight. And so there are about 24, I think, microwave repeaters around town. So when you're watching, perhaps in another state, one of the car chases that seems to go on every month or week or whatever, all too often here in LA, the way the helicopter is able to give you that live feed is they're transitioning from microwave link to microwave link. And occasionally you'll see it. There's a dome where the camera's on the bottom of the helicopter, but there's also a dome with a microwave transmitter that transmits to these towers, and they're auto tracking, which is very impressive technology, really. Yeah, where I was wrong before, we're coming up on Angeles Crest Highway in 1 mile. And Angeles Crest Highway winds up into the mountains, ultimately to by Mount Wilson. You take a little side road to get up to Mount Wilson. And that's quite a trek up there. I think it takes 45 minutes to an hour or something like that to get up there. There's a unusual sight. That over that bridge, that street, they closed the whole street off. That's a farmer's market. There are more and more of those around LA these days, which is nice. You can get locally grown food. So California obviously is a big agricultural state, so getting locally grown foods is not too tough. Just west of where I live in Ventura and Moore Park, there are tons of farms still, although they're going away more rapidly than anyone would like, I think, in favor of more housing. It's weird when you replace food production with housing. But that is the trend out here because land is so valuable. If you want to buy a starter house in a suburb like Simi Valley, where I live in Southern California, if people are wondering what prices are like, my house is 1,270 square feet. It's a tract home, and the whole piece of property is 5,500 square feet. I bought my house 7 years ago. It was built in 1968, and my house was purchased for $161,500 and would sell today for about $650,000 for a 3 not real bedroom house. One bedroom, the master bedroom's like 20 by 15 maybe, and all the other bedrooms are like 8 by 8 or something like that, or 8 by 10. Off to the left is, you can't really see it because of the buildup on the freeway, but is Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, where NASA develops a lot of their space equipment, like the Mars rover, for example. So, and very close to JPL is Caltech, California Institute of Technology, which is a school that also works with JPL quite a bit, I believe. And that leads us towards Pasadena. I know you're probably hoping to see more JPL, but there's a valley over there and it's sort of set down. It goes up the hillside on the other side, but the freeway is cut in, so it's kind of hard to see. And we're rapidly heading into Pasadena, which is just east of Glendale. I don't know if those names trend so much in movies. You do hear about Pasadena a little bit in Glendale, at least when I'm watching, but they may not make any mark on someone who hasn't lived here before. Pasadena is where some of the oldest homes and estates are. There's some extremely expensive homes over there. So here's driving on one of our freeways. This is this Pasadena Freeway. Now there's a Metro link coming my way right down the middle of the freeway. We finally got some public transportation back about a decade ago after the conspiracy between the gasoline, the petroleum companies, the oil companies, and the tire manufacturers bought and dismantled Southern California's very extensive public transportation system. And so this freeway, this is 7:30 on a Saturday, and we still have this many cars. During a weekday, during most hours other than the late night, early morning, this would be bumper to bumper. There's Mount Wilson up there, off to the left. We're going through Pasadena right now. The lack of public transportation is a real shame. I live 30 miles from work, almost exactly. It's actually 29 and a half or something like that. And in order for me to take public transportation to work, I would have to take a train to 3 different buses, or I could take a train all the way out of my way to Union Station and come back, and then take a bus. It would take me about an hour and a half, 2 hours to go those 30 miles. Driving is typically about an hour, sometimes a little over, sometimes a little less in the morning. And if it had been the early days, the San Fernando Valley obviously was not developed when I was a kid. My mom was a kid, driving out into the San Fernando Valley where I grew up was a trip in the country. Ventura Boulevard, which is a little bit better known, is on the very south side of the valley, and that was a country highway among citrus farms. The studios where I work were built in something like 1916, something like that, 1919. They were Republic Studios where John Wayne made all his movies, and they were built where they were built because there was nothing there and the land was cheap. Now Studio City, where I work, the average household income quite a few years ago was $800,000 a year, and a 1,000 square foot house on a piece of property that wasn't a lot bigger sold for $1 million. Now they're more. Very few people can afford to live in Studio City, certainly not me. It's funny to think that once it was countryside where there was nothing. The studio lot that I used to have a whole western street, a big outback area where they could ride horses across the quote-unquote plains, and the LA River goes right through it, but it wasn't so much cement. Well, I guess it was in the 50s. When it was first put there, though, there was no cement there. It was just the wash where the water went. Boy, times have changed. So we're heading out towards San Dimas, actually, for a reference that some people might have heard of. San Dimas is famous for Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because that's where the San Dimas water park was, and that's where they went to school, supposedly. Although there really is a San Dimas, it is a real place, and there really is a water park there. By the way, in Pasadena, or specifically through Glendale and Pasadena, was the oldest freeway in the United States. I never actually take that freeway to go much of anywhere. It's more like a street now because it's 2 lanes, it's cut into the hillside, but it has stop signs getting onto the freeway. It's so old, and the actual speeds you can go safely are much lower than a modern freeway. It was supposedly one of the first freeways, or the first freeway in the United States. But the freeway I'm on, the 210, is somewhat newer. Over there to the south would be the 10 freeways and the 91 freeway. And those freeways all run east-west, connecting basically Los Angeles out towards Riverside and San Bernardino, where sprawl just goes on and on. And to give you perspective, when I was living at UCLA, going to school there, and I was going to visit my friends at Riverside. Riverside was about 65, 70 miles from UCLA. And normally you could do it in about an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes. If you're driving really fast, you could sometimes get out there in an hour, not legally. But I left school at noon, and I was taking the 210 freeway that we're on now. Eventually in San Dimas, there's a good connector across Freeway that lets you go to the 91 and then the 60 to the south and the 10, all those freeways. And I started on this freeway and there was traffic jams all the way. So I transitioned to the 10, traffic jams all the way. So I went to the 90, to the 60, traffic all the way, the 91, and also traffic all the way. And I'm hoping getting those numbers right. It's been an awful long time. I don't drive out this way a whole lot anymore. But long story short, the traffic was so bad at one point that my car was stuck in the fast lane. I had to go to the bathroom so badly, I walked over to the side of the freeway and went behind a bush to go to the bathroom. It took me 8.5 hours. I didn't get to Riverside until 8:30 at night to go 60-something miles, 63 miles. It was that bad because there was a single accident on all of the 3 major freeways. Because when I was a kid, or in college, the 210 I'm on now ended here in San Dimas where we're about to arrive. And it's been extended now. This is one of the newest freeways in Southern California. And it continues out towards Rancho Cucamonga, Alta Loma, where Stan lives. So I will stay on that. But you used to, right here in San Dimas, we come over this hill and come down the other side. You make a right on this connector freeway and the 57. And you would get on usually the 10 freeway. Well, I tried to get on the 10, but it was jammed up. Continued south to the 60, if I remember the order right. It was jammed up, so got the 91. That was long before cell phones and Waze. And so you had no idea what traffic was like. You just sort of winged it. And anyways, right now we're probably only like 25 miles from UC Riverside, but where my friends were, and it still took 3 or 4 hours from here. It was a frickin' nightmare. I just can't get over traffic like that. And that does happen in Southern California. Thankfully, not all the time, but all too often, sadly. Getting much closer now. It's really nice to drive on new freeways because with the big earthquakes we get in Southern California, you see how maybe you can see or can't see, but the roadway, even with the cement freeways, they slit them every something like 20 feet all the way across. They use a diamond saw after the concrete's been poured, and they cut all the way across so that the plates can expand and contract with large temperature changes that we have, so that they don't buckle instead. But as a result, when you get big earthquakes, all these different plates sort of bounce around. And the older freeways, even the 118 that's not that old, the freeways are not terribly smooth after we've had a couple major earthquakes, because all the plates sort of lift up and then they come by and they either grind them to meet, or they put some asphalt to connect the plates together. Very common in Southern California. You can see even this new freeway is not perfect. You can maybe, I don't know if you can see the reflection of the sunlight, but there's little lips on each one of these plates where the expansion and contraction makes them not meet perfectly anymore, and that's really common. I mean, we have large temperature swings. Winters, you can get easily into the 20s, and in summers, 110 plus. That's a large temperature swing over the year. We're getting close. This is really nice driving. When I was a kid, this is about what traffic was like most of the time. And I know you've heard me rail on already about how bad traffic is, but universities have actually studied how much of people's lifetimes are spent commuting and driving in traffic. And it's a dramatic change in the quality of life. Since I live about 30 miles from work, I'm a longer than average commute. Most commutes are supposedly like 10 to 15 miles. Although I don't know how that's possible, because once you get to big city, centers, things get very, very expensive very quickly. And so you can't afford to live there unless you're really wealthy. And I'm reasonably well off. I have no complaints. But I could not live anywhere near work unless my parents had bought a house there. That's the way you could do it. So for me, if I remember the numbers right, I believe they expect over my lifetime, I will have spent something close to 2 years of my life sitting in traffic, commuting to and from work and the various places you go around town. So you can see why traffic sort of affects my whole thinking on life, because, you know, as city planners say, hey, we're just going to allow all that open space to be built. They're never taking into account the fact that they, like in Simi Valley where I live, there are 3 major east-west streets, and they haven't added any new ones, but they've added tons and tons of homes. So when I moved there, one of the reasons, besides the fact that I could afford it, that I moved there, was because the city planners said they weren't going to allow any more construction. Well, that didn't last long. A couple mayors later, and they're building everywhere. And it's really unfortunate, because that traffic I mean, for most of the time I've lived in Simi, there was never any traffic east-west through crossing the city. Now at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you just try and avoid driving at that time, because it'll be stop and go the whole way across the valley, which is pretty unfortunate. So Stan lives in a beautiful area out here, changing subjects to something a little more positive. The beautiful mountains up right up above him there. Hopefully you can see those nicely. And there's a valley between the mountains, and every evening the cold air from the top of the mountains drops down and presses the valley, so you get the evening breezes. So he gets some cool breezes. It does get very warm out here, which I will experience today, no doubt. And this unusual humidity, although the humidity is strangely enough less unusual. He says he gets summer monsoon storms out here every year. It's been worse this year, but they're not uncommon, he says, where the rain will hit the asphalt, immediately evaporate, and the humidity just skyrockets. But he doesn't mind the heat, and fortunately I don't either, so this doesn't bother me much. I notice with the wide angle lens you don't really get the scale, but the mountains up in front dominate your view. Yeah, the wide angle lens really shows a lot more sky than I see just with my eyes. What you're seeing in front of you is haze and fog. When I was a kid, it was smog. I mean, not out here, out here, because all of LA's smog blew out this direction, unfortunately. And we are heading up the last street here before you turn off on Stan Street. I'm actually not going to be turning off onto the street that runs on the front of Stan's house, because his property borders on both streets, the one front and one behind his house. And we're going to be entering by the new gate that he just built, so as to not disturb his wife, who, I don't know if she sleeps, but at least won't disturb her going through the front of the house. So Stan's street on the front of his house is this one right here. Very rural. There's a horse riding place right down the street from him, a few houses down. And this is the street behind his house. Isn't this beautiful? And last time I was here, he had only talked about building the rear gate and fence, and since then, he has actually done it. And it's pretty amazing. If you haven't seen the videos, check out his videos on it, because it's a pretty amazing achievement. All built from scratch, just beautiful. And there is the gate. And the whole fence he's put in. He did all of that by himself, by hand. Amazing work. It is just beautiful. I'm also jealous of the size of his property. That is awesome.